What if I told you that rejecting the material world is actually holding you back on your spiritual journey? So many spiritual seekers think that they have to give up material comforts in order to be truly awakened, but this is simply not the truth. Hi, my name is Michelle Fondin. I'm the author of almost 12 published books, including Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy, exploring your 7 energy centers with mindfulness, yoga, and Ayurveda. And my new book, I'll put a little picture of the cover here, that is now available for pre-order, The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times, a practical guide to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And in this book, that will be available on April 22nd of 2025, but pre-orders are available now at the link below. I talk about this concept of why spiritual seekers really believe that they have to give up money, abundance, wealth, material items in order to be truly enlightened. And this is simply not true, guys. So as we go about this video, we're gonna dive deep into the reasons why I am saying this and why I believe this so wholeheartedly, that is the furthest from the truth. So if you're new to my channel, please do subscribe below, click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. Thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. The spiritual misconception as to why many spiritual seekers feel that they must go into poverty in order to be truly enlightened is because of past belief systems, religions, taking vows as monks or as nuns in the past, taking claims or vows of poverty really meant that you were giving up the worldly for the spiritual. And this misconception is still very predominant in today's society. So let me explain a little bit. I was writing my book, The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times, and in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it is really outlined that poverty is actually wanted, that shunning material wealth is something that the spiritual seeker must do. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind is that most spiritual texts were written centuries ago, if not thousands of years ago, like the Yoga Sutras or the Bible, for example, the early part of the Bible, right? The Old Testament. So when we look at these ancient texts that are thousands of years old, and we have this idea that in order to become enlightened, you must reject the material world, it comes from ancient philosophy or ancient thinking, in which there were divisions in society. If you wanted to become a monk, a priest, a nun, or someone who lived in a spiritual community, your physical needs were taken care of. Now, in the case of monks, this wasn't always the case because a lot of monks were renunciates, which means that they gave up all wealth. And they gave up all wealth. The only thing they did was carry around a bowl to beg for food daily. And that was how they trusted in the divine. Now, I know in biblical stories, there's a phrase in biblical lore that says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy man to enter heaven. Now, the misconception there is that wealth is terrible and God doesn't want you if you're wealthy or if you're abundant or if you have money. Again, this is a misconception. It's not that God doesn't want you to have money or wealth, and you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven if you do. It's more the attachment to these things, the attachment to worldly goods, in the sense that some people get so attached to the material, they get attached to their bodies, the physical world. They get so attached to their things that they have a hard time conceiving trust in God, trust in nature, trust in divine source. And it's because of that attachment to worldly things. So in the case of people that took these vows of poverty in the past, or maybe even in the present, it was a trust fall, if you will, so that By giving up worldly possessions, they were putting their full trust in God to provide for them. So that was the reason why. And even reading through these ancient texts for the Yoga Sutras, it was still very predominant. And in my book, The 8 Limbs of Yoga, I really had to demystify that. Now, what started this conversation for me? What started this conversation was on Sunday, I conducted a Dharma workshop. And I have an upcoming Dharma workshop on March 18th. So if you're interested, please do check it out on my website, michellefontenauthor.com. And someone asked the question about doing spiritual work, but not charging for it. And I had to correct them very quickly because I've been in the spiritual business since 2008. And I was trained by Dr. Deepak Chopra, Dr. David Simon. I went through all of my training through the Chopra Center. And I will tell you right now, I paid a lot of money for that training. But even in it, we did have a seminar that talked about money and business in a spiritual business. And it's not wrong to ask for money in your spiritual business. In fact, it's an energy exchange. So you don't create more karma for the party that is being given the service for free, if you will. So it is an energy exchange. So you're not creating karma, that the person is getting value for what they're receiving so that they're going to pay something in return as an exchange for what they are receiving. But so many people on the spiritual path remain poor. And they remain poor because of this ancient mindset. And they even remain in the mindset that they must somehow reject the physical, reject their bodies, live very minimally and not have a lot. And they continue to foster this sense of poverty consciousness, even though that's not their intention. Their intention is to get more connected to God, more connected to spirit, and they fall under the misconception that they must give up all wealth in order to attain that. So here is the truth, and I write about this in my upcoming book as well. The truth is you chose this physical experience. So as a soul who came here on earth in this space and time, during this time period, you chose to come here. As a soul, you chose to incarnate into a physical body and to have certain experiences. Now, Source knew, right? You're part of Source, but God's Source knew you would need many things for this physical journey. Source knew this, and you knew this too. It wasn't mysterious. It wasn't as if it was a big surprise to God that you would need material items to be here. Now, we are living in times, in modern times. That's why my book's called The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times. We are living in modern times with its constant demands in order to feed ourselves, house ourselves, have a decent car, and have clothing to put on our backs and our children's backs. Furthermore, if you really want to have an expanded life, getting an education, getting certificates, giving your kids opportunities in education, it costs a lot of money. You know this, I know this, and it's not a surprise to God. So if you're on a spiritual journey and you're really thinking how can I be okay with abundance, with money, with wealth, and still be an enlightened being? How can I be okay with that? It's really hard for me to rectify because I feel like the material world is very superficial. I feel like the material world pulls me away from the spiritual world, which can happen. Of course it can happen. But in order to fulfill your wants, needs, and desires, and to become a better person overall, your physical needs must be met, and the physical needs of your family must be met. That includes material goods. That includes having a car. That includes having a home. In most cases, having a car, right? If you live in a big city, then you have public transportation. But most people have to have a vehicle of some sort. You came here, your soul was not surprised to come here and have all these needs. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's much easier to accept the fact that, yes, I need money in this life. Yes, I need material items in this life. And having those things does not make me less of a spiritual person. And in fact, I would wager to say, and I argue this in my book, I would wager to say that it makes you a better person for your spiritual journey. Because when you are in lack, when you don't have enough money to put food on the table, when you don't have enough money to pay your bills, that is the only thing you're focused on. You're not focused on the spirit. You're not focused on your spiritual journey. Your focus is on how can I get my basic needs met? And that is your perpetual focus. But when your basic needs are met, when your needs for food, shelter, clean water, clothing, and so on, when those needs are fulfilled, when those needs are met because you have enough money to fulfill them, you can then focus on other things such as your educational development, your spiritual development, learning more about how to become a more expanded human being. So it's not in lacking that you're going to be able to have the wherewithal to do that. If you don't believe me, ask a starving person. They could probably care the least about their spiritual experience. They just want to get some food to fill their bellies. So that leads me to the principle of detachment. And I do talk about this in other videos. I talk about it in my books. So I'm not really going to expand too much right here on this principle of detachment. If you guys are interested in me doing a specific video on the principle of detachment, then please put it in the comments below and I will produce a video on that. Detachment really means not being too attached to your things so that it prevents you from expanding spiritually. For example, if your only focus is, I want a $300,000 car, and that is your only focus, and you are mad focused on that, that is really attachment to material items, detachment from your spiritual goals, because for most people, it's going to take them quite a while to amass a certain amount of money to put a down payment on a $300,000 car. So then that detracts their focus from other things like education, development, personal growth, and spiritual growth. So you need to know that abundance is a natural state. The world is really, really abundant. In my book, The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times, I talk about the fact that we live in abundance constantly. Abundance is all around us. You only have to take a look at nature, look at the flowers blooming, look at the trees, look at the grass, look at the animals, look at the pets you have, and look at the shelters that are filled with animals because they keep reproducing. And so abundance is the natural state of things. When you think about that, you know that it's in nature that abundance is everywhere. And you are a part of nature. So of course, your natural way of being is abundance. So when you can connect those 2 points, it doesn't make sense for you to opt for poverty or opt for lack, because that's not the way the general world operates. The world operates in abundance. It took me a long time to rectify the material world and monetary world with the spiritual world. In the beginning, when I was opening my yoga studio in 2008, I began doing a lot of free classes and free seminars and free workshops. And I felt in some way I didn't really need to charge for certain things or not charge enough for certain things because it was under the umbrella of the spiritual realm. But very quickly, I learned that if I did that, I wouldn't be able to pay the bills for my yoga studio. I wouldn't be able to pay my yoga teachers, and I wouldn't be able to pay myself. So very quickly, I learned that living in this world, it was really necessary for me to charge adequately in order to keep my business open, since most businesses do fail within the first year. And so for me, it was like, I can't provide these services for my clients if my doors close, in the case of my yoga studio. And so I really had to quickly turn that around and say, no, I'm providing value to my clients. And so even though, yes, this is a spiritual community, yes, I'm doing a lot of spiritual teachings here, it's also important that I keep the doors open so that the clients can come and receive the benefits from these spiritual practices. So I really had to rectify that in my own brain in order to accept the fact that I needed to make enough money to keep my business afloat. So if you're really struggling with this, whether you have a spiritual business or you're doing some spiritual work, Or maybe you want to, or maybe you're in that where you're like, in my spiritual awakening, I know there's something in the spiritual realm I want to do, but I'm not sure how to do it. I'm not sure how much to charge. I don't even know if I could make a living doing this. Just know that if you rectify money with spirituality, if you rectify that belief system, and just knowing that abundance is everywhere, there is no lack, and that God knew you would need money and abundance to be able to do things in this life. And just this one last thought before we sign off on this video, and another argument not to shun the material world. In the past, and sometimes now in the present, when there are spiritual beings that are leaders in spiritual movements, they were often taken care of by people living in their community. So they were the spiritual gurus, they were the spiritual leaders, speakers. And since they have a community or had a community, those community members would provide for them. So they would be fed, they would be sheltered. And so they had their needs provided for them, and they had a community around them serving them and the community, such as life in an ashram, for example, or life in a monastery, for example. So just know that most of us in the modern world are not living in ashrams, we're not living in monasteries. So we really do need to embrace this concept that wealth is not bad. The material world is not bad. It is good. The world is already abundant. We're just entering into the mindset of the world that already knows this. So I hope this was helpful for you on your spiritual journey. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this with other spiritual seekers. Thank you so much for your support of my YouTube channel. You can pre-order my brand new book, The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times. You can purchase any of my 11 other published books on Amazon. And you can join a meditation course or my Dharma workshop. And I'll see you in the next video.